Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Facebook Live. Thanks for joining us. Before we jump in, it's just do some housekeeping. It's great to see everybody joining in and loving the group. We've got 4,300 people. Thanks for inviting all your friends. It's just growing and people are really loving it. Congratulations to Carol Lobsinger, who won the first recipe challenge and donated her prize money to the Pet and Wildlife Rescue. So if you want to be a part of that each week, you can upload a recipe with a photo and directions and ingredients. And yeah, we just want to create the most useful recipes that inspire other people to eat healthy food. So over the last week or two, Alex and I have released updated food lists, a Kickstart guide, a program, and a masterclass. We've been working on these things for a very long time, really since the first Nutrient Optimizer Challenge, just trying to bring all those things together to show people how they can implement healthy eating that's nutrient dense and really enjoyable and luscious and fun and will help you achieve your goals. So there's a range of different food lists and meal plans for different people with different goals. So that'll help them move forward to enjoy eating those foods that help them relieve themselves from that processed food addiction that we'll be talking about today with Joan, who's nodding eagerly in waiting. And we've been working with Saskia Lesser to create some amazing looking recipe books that look fantastic, that just bring these recipes out and make them look beautiful. So we'll have about 20 or 30 different recipes up the front of the book, and then a list of 150 recipes at the back that align with each of those goals. So we can't wait to release those, and we think they'll be a real game changers. But to get to the main event today is Dr. Joan Ifland. Welcome. I've really been thrilled to I heard your interview with Ivor Cummins and really loved it, and just dove into a bunch of your YouTube chats. And there was a recent chat with Brian Sanders, and I think you really add something really powerful and useful and liberating to the discussion about nutrition and food. And I suppose myself, I've been fascinated by the different things that help us to eat more and eat less without being consciously having to control that to the nth degree, to track and weigh everything, because that just doesn't seem to be a long-term solution for a lot of people. They tend to relapse and fall off the wagon if they just tend to try to eat less of the same food and just restrict calories, eat less and move more. It just tends to be a fool's errand if that's all you're thinking about. So yeah, I've really enjoyed your contribution to the discussion. You've been doing this for as long as I've been alive. I think you got your master's when I was 2, and I'm not that young anymore. But I mean, by way of introduction, you've written a book on processed food addiction. I suppose, why did you get to a point where you said, I'm going to write a textbook on processed food addiction? What got you to that point?
Well, there's a program that it's given by Union Institute and University. It's headquartered in Cincinnati, where I grew up. And it does prepare people to go into new fields. It's a school that's designed for new fields. And I took my PhD there in addictive nutrition. There are 2 of us on the planet who took that addictive nutrition degree. And I'm not sure the school is operating the same way anymore. But there I was. I had the degree. I knew how to read research, and I knew how to write research. And for example, with my doctoral committee, we published the first description of what we called refined food addiction in the academic press. So we got to name the disease in the academic press. I was writing chapters and papers for other people. And I thought, just like, we need to build this body of research. And along came CRC Press and said, why don't you write a textbook for the field? And my dad had just died. He had left me enough of an inheritance that I could support myself. It was supposed to be a project for 1.5 years, and it ended up taking 3 years.
Yep.
But I did. Do you mind if I show the book?
Yeah, sure. It's a massive piece of work of
Yeah.
yeah. Literally the textbook on processed food addiction. How many words?
The main thing to know about that book is there are 2,000 citations. So
Wow.
everything that you can describe about processed food addiction has research. And you're like, how could there be that much research when we hardly have even ever heard of processed food addiction? It's because there's massive research on obesity, eating disorders, and drug addiction. And a lot of that, unbeknownst to the researcher, is illustrating aspects of this huge food addiction syndrome. So that's why one thing that I know about that I could not find a study for, and that is blackout eating. But everything else is like relationship problems. Oh yeah. Chronic overeaters of processed foods have relationship problems. It's an illustration of one of the diagnostic criteria for an addiction is relationship problems.
Yeah, I suppose just trying to understand the differentiation between, you talk about processed food addiction versus food addiction. Some people say I'm addicted to food, and then other people say, well, how can you be addicted to food when food is necessary for life? How do you draw that line between what's healthy for us and what's processed food and what's addictive, and why are some foods addictive while others are just healthy and natural and cause healthy releases of dopamine? I suppose that's as we've talked about, it's a fascinating, nuanced topic that can get quite controversial, and how you define addiction and whether food can be addictive. And just really interested to unpack your view on that, and your why is food addictive?
So the only reason there's confusion about this is that the industry which produces these substances has deliberately, over 30, maybe you could really say 50 years, disguised what's really going on. So with other addictions, it's just absolutely clear. If you're smoking, there's smoke in the air and you're inhaling it. It's super clear. This air is clean air, and this air has smoke in it. When I'm inhaling the smoke, I'm absorbing nicotine. Alcohol, no problem. Even if it's 2 glasses of clear liquid, this one smells and tastes like vodka, and this one smells and tastes like water. No obfuscation there. You're drinking alcohol.
No,
but with processed foods, we didn't get that break. Because by the time tobacco came into processed foods, they were, masters of the art of deception. And so this loaf of bread that you were eating after tobacco came into processed foods looks a heck of a lot like the loaf of bread you were eating before. It tastes, but because tobacco is formulating this new bread, it's got all kinds of addictive substances in it. And you're eating it. And you think you're eating bread, but you're not. You're eating baked, drug-like substances. And how do we know this? We know 2 ways. Well, there are a lot of ways, but we know 2 ways primarily. The brains of people who are using drugs chronically are doing very specific things that the brains of people who are not using drugs chronically are not doing. So it's almost cut and dried. It's across the spectrum of severity. There are degrees of activity or lack of activity in different parts of the brain. But anybody who says, oh no, this doesn't exist. Like I read your article and you cited somebody who said, no, this doesn't exist. Yeah, it does. It was the earliest evidence that really got a bunch of us going in the field, and that was the brain imaging evidence. Yeah.
And I suppose it'd be interesting, I dig into nutrition and try to quantify it to understand the things that help us to relieve ourselves from that overdrive of dopamine. Be interesting for you to talk about how the food industry has sort of quantified and optimized food to be more palatable and more like hyper-autumnal, or drive a greater dopamine hit, like the likes of Howie Moskowitz, and driving I know you don't like to talk about the bliss point, but the point at which we tend to crave more and eat more, and find that overdrive of binge instinct that just makes us eat more and more.
Yeah. So processed foods activate all 4 of the major addiction pathways: dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoid, and opiate.
Yep.
It's one of the reasons why processed food addiction is very, very hard to put into remission. It takes a lot of hours of recovery messaging to kind of drown out or crowd out the addiction messaging, because most people have started the addiction at a very young age.
Yeah.
Like you hope that you don't start alcoholism at least until you're in your teens, mid to late teens. But the processed food industry mercilessly markets to babies in infant formula that's 50% sugar or corn syrup solids. So you have, so what is that? I mean, when I say activates the dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoid, and opiate pathways, it just means that the neurons in those centers are firing a lot. They're firing a lot. They're putting out a lot of addictive, craving neurotransmitters. And so the person who has that going on is hearing those urges, hearing them. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is those craving centers are able to actually go over to behavior centers. And with enough stimulation, they actually get control of behavior. Okay, so that is really specific. You can just put the addictive substance in front of somebody in an MRI machine, and you see those pathways hyperactivate. You cannot debate that. That is, it's there. And a cocaine addict's brain is doing the same thing, etc.
Any normal food will release some dopamine and some serotonin, and that's sort of a healthy pathway. But the cannabinoids come from omega-6 oils by themselves and all those sorts of things. But then when they're combined in those perfect ratios that tend to just be formulated to overdrive those pathways, it just does set up addiction-like behaviors or addictive behaviors, or however you want to term it. I suppose my as you read in my brief article that I wrote to try and unpack it, I think it's really powerful to say, well, we're addicted to processed foods, not foods, because I think if you say I'm addicted to food, then you're all of a sudden very powerless. But once you empower yourself to say, these are the foods that I tend to be addicted to and I tend to binge on and I can't restrict, once I'm exposed to that donut or that lasagna my mum gave me when I was a kid that sets off all those nice pathways that remind me of how blissful it was when I was 10 or whatever. It's those things that tend to reinforce that dopamine overdrive that we can't stop doing. So once we're exposed to those particular foods, we tend to overdrive our appetite and our binge instinct. But normal food is healthy and generates some of that, but not the same bliss point or whatever you want to call it that brings them all together at once.
Well, there is, so if you're using the more different substances you're using, the harder the addiction is to put into remission. So if somebody's drinking and smoking cigarettes and smoking marijuana and snorting cocaine and doing some meth and a little bit of heroin, that person it's going to take a long time, multiple treatment attempts before that person gets to their first year of abstinence, as opposed to the 15-year-old who comes in and has had a heavy year of drinking alcohol. That kid, that you can put that addiction into remission with enough protection. So the processed food industry has literally tens of thousands of substances that they add to our food. And they don't actually have to put it on the label. I mean, we know the big categories: sugars and sweeteners, flour, gluten, excessive salt, dairy, processed fats, and caffeine. And then you have this just like, who knows what food additives are being put in. So it's another reason why the addiction is so hard to put into remission. But you're talking about, I think that when we talk about binging is the result of dieting. Binging is the result of not eating enough. And there is a very primitive part of the brain which drives survival eating. Let's call it survival eating. Okay, so what's survival eating? Survival eating is you get somewhere, maybe you've walked for 2 weeks, you're a primitive person, it's millions of years ago or hundreds of thousands of years ago, but you have imprinted on your brain that this particular tree is going to be bearing this particular fruit at this time of year in this place. And so the tribe walks 2 weeks to get there. Yep. When they get there, every other animal remembers that. So there's a tremendous amount of competition for that food. And then all the predator animals know that the herbivores are going to be there. And it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous to get in there and eat that food because somebody's waiting there to eat you. And so the survival feeding is eat as much as you can, as fast as you can. When you're full, get out of there, go sleep it off, come back, do it again until that food source is gone.
Totally.
Well, yeah, so that's binge eating.
Yeah.
It's a survival feeding mechanism. And it's not, I think it is related to the processed foods, but I think it's more related to dieting.
Yeah. So I heard your discussion with Brian talking about your thoughts on fasting, and that was fascinating. A lot of people are big on fasting, and if I just fast for as long as I can, and surely that's got to be healthy for me. But my experience is you get to the point at the end of the fast, and I think you've got a similar view, that your food choices at that point are very indiscriminate. You're just going to go for the most energy dense way to get energy back in as quickly as you can without any thought of nutrition, nutrient density, satiety. You're just going to go for really energy dense food.
Yeah. All of those things, what food should I eat is all frontal lobe. Yeah. And you've got the frontal lobe has only been in the human brain for about 2% of the time that humans have existed. So humans started evolving 7 million years ago. We've had a frontal lobe for about 140,000 years. So this frontal lobe is literally 7 neurons thick.
Wow.
You have billions of neurons running the rest of the brain. So pasted on top of these millions of years of highly conditioned, famine avoiding, got to remember famine's the leading cause of death on the earth for all times, that this brain is hardwired to avoid starving to death. And it does a lot of things to protect us from that. But, oh man, if you don't eat enough, especially if you don't eat enough, but your brain knows that food is available, that most primitive survival part of the brain will just grab hold of behavior. You're not making a decision anymore. You're not using your frontal lobe. This survival brain, it's called the reptilian brain, and I think of it that way. It's just like this reptile. It reaches up and grabs control of your behavior, and you're like eating, and you're watching yourself eat, and you can't stop. 2 different parts of the brain.
And no matter how much conscious knowledge you've got and how much you know about food and what good food is, when you're hungry, and at that point, your reptilian brain just takes over. And I was having a discussion this week online about orthorexia and what's orthorexia and when does a focus on healthy eating become unhealthy. And I think we term all these foods as bad foods, and we try to limit food and avoid eating too much and all these sorts of things. And it sets up this dichotomy between your conscious brain, which you say is very small, although that's the first thing we think about. We think it's in control. We delude ourselves that it's in control, but that reptilian drive to survive is so much more powerful, and it just takes over. So once we've set up this tension between our primordial need to survive and get through the famine and get enough energy to make it through to the next famine, We set up this insanity nearly that
It is insane.
we think
Absolutely.
there's something wrong with us, and we've got disordered eating, and we're bulimic, or whatever you want to call it, and it can get into a very serious, concerning situation.
Yeah, it can kill us. So anorexia is it's becoming addicted to not eating. So we know that, the human brain is amazing. And the kindness of the human brain is amazing. So if you get into one of these famine situations and you walk 2 weeks to your food source and it's not there, and then you're going to have to walk 2 weeks more to somewhere else, and it might go on for months, your brain will release dopamine and serotonin in higher quantities to reduce the pain of starvation enough that you will keep going. And so when you have chronic dieting, you just kind of like get addicted to those that dopamine serotonin release that's associated with starving.
Yeah, and your body can release ketones to feed your brain during that period, and really ketones are a sign to you don't have enough food. Go out and hunt. It's time to find some food and get it now. It's not time to sleep and relax. It's time to be really alert and get out there and get food.
So that's one of the characteristics of anorexia is that people are very restless. They're sitting there talking to somebody, but they think it's exercise addiction. They think it's part of the drive to be thin, which is certainly a component of that. The thin ideation has been shown to precede anorexia, bulimia, binge eating. So that's a driver. It's a cultural driver. But it's so sad.
What are your thoughts on nutrient deficiencies and cravings and that role in eating more and our drive to eat and binge eat and eat more or less if we've got a reasonable level of nutrient density in our food?
So we got to keep going back to one basic point, which you brought up right at the beginning of the discussion, which is we're not talking about food. Okay, so the way the brain responds to sugar, flour, fat, excessive salt, gluten, dairy, caffeine is the way it would respond to drugs. So it's really helpful to go over here and think, okay, how does cocaine addiction work? How does heroin addiction work? People often become emaciated in the course of heroin addiction, for sure. Okay, so what's going on there? Is the addiction is suppressing the drive for natural foods. And that's the same thing we're experiencing in processed food addiction. There is good research showing that obese people are malnourished. Why? It's because the drug-like foods that they're eating, let's just say consuming. I mean, I can't say they're snorting or they're not drinking them, but they're consuming these drugs that are being presented as food, which is, to me, the source of all the confusion. Once you really get that deep down in your head, this is not food. Processed foods are not food. They're drugs. The body is reading them as drugs. The brain is adapting to them as drugs. Once you get that really, really deep on the inside, everything else starts to make sense.
And once you remove those out of the picture, you can then all the natural, healthy eating tendencies and drives and all the enjoyment of food come back in. If you've got this processed food that everything is, we're not designed for processed foods or, hyperstimulation from social media and pornography or whatever you want to call it. Recreational drugs. We're just not designed for that level of stimulation. So everything normal in the world becomes boring. But once you take those things out, you actually taste your food and it becomes nourishing and enjoyable, and you're satisfied with enough food. Interested, I saw a chat with Julia Ross with yourself and really fascinated by her view on the role of amino acids in cravings and neurotransmitters. And have you dug into that and experienced that? And what have you seen when people get enough amino acids and proteins to improve their mental function and cravings?
I think you have to appreciate the power of amino acids, and you have to work with one of Julia Ross's staff people really, really closely, like sometimes on an hour by hour, day by day basis. So I looked at that and I said, wow, Julia's done an amazingly good job of sorting out the amino acid scene. She's got 3 great books. The Mood Cure, the Diet Cure, the
Craving Cure.
Yeah, 3 incredibly great books. And she lays it out in incredible detail what you do if you're going to attempt amino acid therapy for yourself on your own. And I would just say that get with Julia, get with one of her people, get with somebody who's trained by Julia. I'm going in quite a different direction. So I'm going in the direction of really addressing the mirror neurons in the brain. Mirror neurons run the brain.
Yeah.
It's so if your reptilian brain wants to reach up and start to make you binge, it's going to check with the mirror neurons first.
Yeah.
Because
what's everybody else around me doing?
Yeah, if nobody else is going and running under that peach tree and eating the peaches, I don't care how hungry I am. I'm going to hang back with my tribe and see why are they not running in there? Oh, I see that crocodile now. So mirror neurons are the fastest way to stop behaviors that are being driven by the food industry, and the fastest way to start behaviors that are just, this is real food, eat this food. And that is, so Julia's like really dug down deep into the amino acids. And I hear her stories and I just know all the science supports that. She's done her homework. She's really dug down deep. I've dug down deep in how to use mirror neurons to get onto a safe track. And so I just said, Julia, rock on with the amino acids. And if somebody wants to do amino acids, I'm just sending them to Julia.
Yeah, I find it personally really fascinating and really powerful because it's like all those tryptophan and everything is a precursor to our serotonin and dopamine and all the endorphins. And if we don't have enough of those, we end up, as Julia says, we end up craving more food. We crave more protein, but then if we keep on eating these low protein, hyper processed foods through a combination of fat and carbs together, we just end up going through more energy, more calories, more empty calories in an effort to get what we need, and then it drives those dopamine pathways that leaves us in this cycle that ends badly all the time. But completely fascinated by that. On the mirror neurons, I'm really fascinated by your views on community and how a supportive community where everybody is eating healthy food that is good for you and unwind that drive to overeat, that binge instinct is really powerful, even more powerful than a conscious knowledge to be around people. I'd love to hear your stories there and your pathway to realizing that.
So it's, I'll give you a really good example. I was in the middle of my doctoral program, so I was on the path to becoming a leading expert in this field. And my daughter was going to pick me up on a corner, and it happened to be the corner that we chose had a sweet shop on it. So just to entertain myself, I started looking at the sweets, and it wasn't more than a few minutes before this thought rose in my head. Oh, well, I could have that one. And literally my hand is reaching for the door of the shop to go in and get it, where I have like a built-in safety system that says, run, run, run. So that voice came on and I realized what I was doing, and I just went to the far corner and texted her, and she picked me up down there. So what happened there? What happened in those few minutes? I know that these substances are associated with 125 diseases. They make people violently ill. They are highly addictive. They don't do anything good. They're just incredibly destructive. And there was my hand reaching out. Well, what happened was that I was activating this craving center which is, that craving center is the midbrain. So somewhere in the middle of those 7 million years, the midbrain came into existence. First, we had the reptilian brain, then the midbrain, which is the craving brain, and then this neocortex, just very recently. So that center had started firing up in response to seeing all these addictive substances, just looking at them. And it fired up strongly enough to reach over to my behavior center and get control over the locomotion neurons that control my hand reaching out to that door handle to go in. Unfortunately, my frontal lobe is programmed enough to just say, run, get out of here, get out of here, go, leave.
Warning.
Yeah, so that is something that I hope every one of your listeners, everyone who listens to this podcast or this video or this interview really gets deep down on the inside. The choice center is in the frontal lobe. You are not choosing one darn thing. When your hand reaches out to that shop door, you have a multi-million-year-old part of your brain that has gotten fired up and has just fired those neurons over to the locomotion center and grabbed hold of your behavior. It has nothing to do with the frontal lobe.
Yeah.
This is not your fault. Yeah, don't let anybody tell you that you're making a choice or why are you self-sabotaging or it's your childhood issues. Heck no. You're having an allergic reaction and your neurons are firing up and grabbing control of your locomotion center. Yeah.
And you've found to manage that, putting people in communities that of like-minded people who exhibit healthy behaviors just totally turns that around. People mirror other people in those healthy behaviors.
Shocking how well that works.
Yeah.
It is shocking. Now, so you get somebody on video chats like you and I are on right now, and they spend hours and hours in there. It does take hours. You're fighting the 3 or 4 million year old part of the brain to stop doing what it's programmed to do. And instead, you've got to reorient those mirror neurons so that they are just connecting with the other people, because the mirror neurons will say eventually. You've got to kind of earn those mirror neurons' trust in a way. But the research on this is great. We know it takes at least 5 people whom you know really, really well. And if they're doing something with food, you're very likely to copy that. But that means you have to spend enough time in these video chats, or we also do a daily podcast for our members, listening to those podcasts to where you can get those mirror neurons to kind of wake up and say, oh, we're not following the commercials in the TV anymore. But we've been following those for years. We know those people well.
Yeah.
Oh, we're following these people? Yeah. Okay, well, I got to get to know these people. Yeah. And then eventually people will find themselves able to walk past the sweets. Oh, because my tribe doesn't eat that.
Yeah. And it becomes part of your identity, and an internal identity, not just, conscious control and a matter of guilt and conscious decision. Brishti from the group had a question about addiction to fruit. I know from her background, fruit was something that she always enjoyed with the family, and that's something that she struggles to not overeat sometimes now. Do you find people, like, what do people get addicted to fruit, or what type of foods do people tend to overeat and binge on generally? Anything, or what type of foods particularly?
Well, go back to our, these are drugs and this is food. So anything that's been processed, foods, it's what you said in your article, foods have natural endorphins in them. They are meant to be pleasurable. It's not just, I'm going to eat this so that I don't die. I'm going to eat it and I'm going to enjoy it. It's a very gentle dopamine release, and it might last for hours. Now, this is opposed to an addictive dopamine release, which is a surge and a crash. It's a high and a crash. And in the crash, you feel so bad that you're driven back to eating these toxic substances. So that's one thing that I wanted to come back to. What is the difference between how dopamine is released by real food versus dopamine released by processed foods? Because when you extract and concentrate the natural endorphins in food, that is what makes them addictive. It is the processing. It is the concentrating. It is making them into liquids and syrups. It is crystallizing them. It is pulverizing them into powder. It's removing the fiber. All of those things mean that the food's going to get into your system really fast, and then you're going to crash.
Totally.
So that's one distinction. Yeah. So, but nonetheless, people are left with sensitivities, and like high sugar fruits. High sugar fruits are a problem for a lot of recovering food addicts. Just don't recommend them. And then so she was asking about fruit in general. Some people are so sensitive to a sweet taste that they are relieved once they are not provoking their taste buds with fruit. There are starches that people can't eat. So we do, I watch the food trends and the keto food plan where you're eating protein, fat, and some vegetables. Not everybody needs to go that far. But this is something that gets worse over time. So you might, like when I started this food plan 24 years ago, I was able to eat a lot of starches that I can't eat today. Even though my disease is not active, it still is getting worse. And I'm just happier with fewer starches. Like I don't eat the grains anymore. So yeah, it gets worse over time, and you're constantly watching your thoughts and just like, you know what? I noticed that I didn't eat grains the other day, and the circles under my eyes are gone. I think I'll try not eating grains, and then you notice that you're happier. Your mood is better. So
I love how you said when I changed how I ate, my family didn't need to be yelled at all of a sudden as much. So that was hilarious.
Marty, that is what got me into this field 24 years ago, because I had been working very hard not to be a witch. I was raised by a witch, and I didn't want to raise my children that way. And yet I would just erupt. And this is really, really distressing. It's very distressing for anybody, but for mothers of young children, when you're traumatizing your child and you can't do anything about it. So when I just got off of sugars and flours to try, one more weight loss program, and the meltdowns stopped and the yelling stopped. And then I sat down with my family and I said, you know what? I think I'm giving you foods that make you irritable with me. So I'm going to stop doing that. I'm just going to stop doing that. And then to see them calm down and the two of them stop fighting with each other. My husband and I stopped fighting. We stopped fighting with the kids. It was like, it was miraculous to find out all those years of therapy and women's groups and support groups and 12-step groups. I needed all of that to understand what had happened to me behaviorally and so on. But to find out that it was all being driven by these, at that time, all I knew about was the sugars and flours. It was shocking. There's not a word for it. Shocking is just the beginning. And then to go to my support group and say, do people come in less irritable on these foods? And they're like, yeah.
Why didn't you tell me?
Somebody tell my therapist, But I told my therapist, and she started working with people on their food, and she was shocked.
Wow.
All that education, and nobody mentions that these foods drive people crazy.
Wow. I was looking at some graphs the other day of, you talk about the smoking trend coming down and the processed food coming up and obesity coming up, and it's an amazing correlation. And I was just blown away when I saw the data aligning so perfectly. Can you talk about how I think you've got a unique insight into how the people who are running nicotine tobacco industry just switched, when they saw the writing on the wall that they couldn't continue this tobacco addiction model, continue it in that environment. They just switched horses basically to look at processed food. And yeah, interested in your insights into that world.
I just got a new piece just in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So there's a tobacco center at the University of California, San Francisco. Started when somebody sent 40,000 tobacco documents, an insider, a whistleblower, to a professor there, Stan Glantz. And he's just spent all this time dissecting, correlating. Well, he recently published on a discussion in these tobacco documents of juice for children. I did not know this, or if I did know this, I'd forgotten it. In 1963, I forget which tobacco company it was, bought Hawaiian Punch.
Wow.
In 1963. And there are explicit discussions in these documents. And this is horrifying. I mean, like, cover your children's ears. This is so horrifying. So what they did was they took what they knew about marketing cigarettes, a pack of 20 cigarettes. They took that color, flavor, size, all of that marketing expertise that they had around cigarettes, and it was formidable. Nobody should ever forget that these people were able to persuade 2/3 of American adults to smoke. 2/3. 2 out of 3 American adults smoked. That is incredibly powerful marketing. So they took that marketing expertise and they said, let's see what we can do with sugary drinks for children. So they took the flavor and the coloring and the packaging, and all of a sudden you get it. Just think about, what does a juice box look like? It looks like a pack of cigarettes. Are you okay? Oh, I can't hear you. I bet you can't hear me.
Yeah.
Now I can hear you.
Cool. Had some audio issues. Cool.
Oh, sorry. I think it started when I started talking about these papers that the University of San Francisco has. Are you able to hear me?
Can you guys hear me now? No.
I can see you.
Girl, sorry. Where were we?
I think I lost you at when I started to talk about the tobacco papers that the University of California, San Francisco has.
Can I hear you now?
I can hear you.
You got me. Oh well. So where were we? Tobacco industry, comfort. So how much do the comfort foods work to relieve our lack of enjoyment in the rest of our life? Do you think when we compensate for issues where we're not getting the joy and satisfaction from the rest of our life?
So that's really sad, because to me, what's really going on is that these quote unquote comfort foods are the foods that cut us off. So when you're craving and you're brain fogged, you can't connect with other people. You're just thinking about food and you're just wishing they would go away and leave you alone so that you can go eat. So it's like saying comfort alcohol or comfort cocaine or comfort marijuana. It's not the right word. It's addiction is the right word, where you're turning to this to avoid withdrawal or to get a buzz or whatever. But it is pulling you away from the rest of your life. it's cutting down on your joy.
Mm.
I mean, I just came back from a couple of days with my grandsons, and the contrast between how I'm connected to those two little boys versus how I was connected to my two daughters is day and night. Like, I can really focus on them. I can spend hours doing dopey things or childlike things. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that with my girls. I didn't have enough patience or attention span. Yeah. So that's the irony of quote unquote comfort foods, is they just are so full of pain in so many different directions. Right? And that is an incredible, gutsy. Well, you know what it's like? It's like calling cigarettes sexy.
Yeah.
Calling processed foods comforting is like calling cigarettes sexy. Once you get clear of them and you look back at the pain that they cause, you're just like, oh my goodness, how could I have ever thought that? Yeah.
Totally. There was a question from someone watching about the role of depression, and anxiety medication and how they contribute to binge eating and addictive food eating. Is there a correlation that you see with the way they play with the neurons?
Yes. So one other part of the brain that you expect to see to be hyperactive in an addicted brain is the stress pathway. It's the corticotropin releasing factor pathway. And when it erupts, it sends signals to the adrenal glands to release adrenaline. This is why we are anxious. It's because we're eating these processed foods that pump up anxiety. The other thing that's going on is because those dopamine, serotonin, endocannabinoid, and opiate pathways are being overstimulated, it's not the production of the neurotransmitter. I mean, it's just producing away, but the receptor wears out. It collapses. It looks like a dead flower. So the neurotransmitter comes over here to try to hit this receptor, and it's not receiving. So you don't get messages of I feel good. These are the addictive pathways, the reward pathways, the feel good pathways. They've got different names depending on what kind of state they're in. But you get depressed. Of course, you get depressed. Because the feel good part of the brain, oh, life is good. You're good. Look, those people over there, they're good. This is a good thing happening. That part of the brain is not getting through. So, of course, you have depression and anxiety and irritability because you've got all this adrenaline running around your system. And then because you cannot see the good in yourself anymore, you have a lot of shame. So I call that DIAS, DIAS, depression, irritability, anxiety, and shame. And the thing that's so amazing is it lifts. You get off the processed food and you get around cheerful people who are really working all the time to think positively. That's going back to the mirror neurons in a nice, healthy community. It's pretty miraculous how much happier and cheerful and optimistic people become. And now, so what is... Sorry.
I was just going to say, because your dopamine receptors are always overstimulated, you can't hear, they can't sense normal stimulation anymore. So nothing in life is as pleasurable. And I've been fascinating just looking into Julia Ross's work at how much we're all on SSNRIs, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, and those things are just recycling our neurotransmitters that are produced from healthy food, from healthy amino acids that a lot of us aren't getting enough of. So not only are we not getting enough from our food, those pathways are overstimulated, so we can't hear that anymore. And it's like, no wonder everybody's on these drugs to try and recycle these critical neurotransmitters that we're not getting enough of and not recycling properly. So, the diet is so critical in our mental health and happiness and vitality and well-being.
Well, the irony of the SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake, is, okay, great. They've got more serotonin circulating in that synapse between where the neurotransmitter is being produced and where it's going to hit. There's more serotonin in there. Great. Except for one thing. That means that these overstimulated receptors, which are being overstimulated into collapse, are now being even more overstimulated into collapse. Yeah, so it's why it is so hard to get people off of those SSRIs, is because you have to back up enough so that you can persuade these receptors to open up again. It's a trick. It's a trick. Yeah.
We had a question on the role of disease like PCOS on cravings and binging. Is there any relationship between what people crave and tendency to be more addicted to processed food with PCOS?
I know, this is a good question, and it illustrates a lot of, what came first, the chicken or the egg. So you're eating these processed foods, and now, as we know, these feel-good receptors are collapsed, and you're not feeling good, but you want to feel good. That is one of the drivers of cravings. I want to feel good. I remember the last time I ate this, or the time 800 times ago when I ate this, it really made me feel good. I want that feeling again. And you keep trying and trying and trying. And more receptors are collapsing and collapsing. And you keep trying harder and harder. And so that explains what's called progression, where you're eating more and more and more and more. So these foods are inflammatory. And as Ivor Cummins has so beautifully illustrated, they cause heart disease. And we know that they cause high blood pressure. Sugar causes high blood pressure because there's so much sugar in the blood. It's so thick, the body has to push. So those poor ovaries are inflamed.
Wow.
And the tubes are inflamed. Your skin is inflamed. Your gut is inflamed. Your heart is inflamed. Your brain is inflamed. All of these things are going incredibly wrong. And, researchers are beginning to try to pick up on this. It's like, maybe this is all part and parcel of the same inflammation disorder. It's like, it's processed foods, come on. So so instead of saying like, oh, processed foods cause this and they cause that and they cause this, they're inflammatory and you have malnutrition and you have the hyperactive, instead of like parsing out all the different biochemical reactions that processed foods induce, they just kind of like stand back and they say, oh, look, obesity.
Yeah.
Oh, look at all the things that obesity causes. Oh, PCOS and depression and heart disease. No, everybody loves studying obesity because it's so easy to measure. But in fact, processed foods by a lot of different mechanisms cause all those problems. They don't cause each other.
Yeah.
So it's not like PCOS causes cravings. You have an addiction to an inflammatory food, so you have tons of cravings, and the inflammation gives you PCOS.
Yeah, definitely. The processed foods, the poor diet is really the upstream ultimate thing that obesity and everything just flows from as a consequence.
Yeah, it's just this fountain of disease. Obesity is just one of them.
I had a question. I think I might have cut you off during the microphone dropout about tobacco and the university paper on tobacco, and just unpack that more and discuss that further.
Okay, so Stan Glantz somebody sent Stan Glantz at University of California, San Francisco, 40,000 internal tobacco documents. It was instrumental in the pursuit of the tobacco companies in court, these internal papers and what they showed and how. So what it really showed is the internal workings of an addiction merchant.
Wow.
And, I have a big business background. I have an MBA from Stanford. I worked for a Fortune 200 corporation for 5 years. And I grew up in a corporate household. So my dad was a researcher for a corporation. Great. So addiction merchants are just like any other business person, they're constantly looking for markets. And my original idea was that, oh, they got in trouble with courts. They knew people that when people quit smoking, they would move over to processed foods. No, that was not true. I made a mistake there. Own it, like owning it, like correcting myself with better information. And where it really showed up was in, now Stan Glantz and his team has just this year published a new paper. They went back into these tobacco papers and they found discussion of transferring cigarette marketing technology. A box of cigarettes, 20 cigarettes in a box. The color, the flavor, the shape, all of that, transferring that marketing from teenagers. And part of the addiction model is go for the youngest possible user. So transferring that marketing from teenagers to toddlers in juice boxes.
Wow.
Just when you think, maybe you know how bad it is, and then a paper like this is published, and you think, wow. So they bought, I forget which tobacco company it is, bought Hawaiian Punch in 1963.
Which was right at the beginning of the processed food explosion, basically.
Well, so I always thought that the big explosion was in 1985 when they bought Kraft, Nabisco, and General Foods.
But they were making the move from way back then.
Obesity just takes off right from there.
Yeah.
But the point is that for 20 some years before that, they were developing marketing expertise. How do you market sugar to small children?
And just about planning their exit strategy from the tobacco industry over to the processed food industry.
I don't think that's what happened. I don't think that's what happened anymore. I know I've said that. I admit I've said that. And it is, on the surface, it looks very, it's very defensible. I think this is broader. I think that these addiction merchants are constantly looking for markets, just like anybody does. Anybody, if you sell electronic gadgets, you're constantly looking for what's the next electronic gadget. And why do I say that? Because now, for example, we have vaping and we have legal marijuana. Oh, we see tobacco is just like scanning. Oh, vaping,
new market,
marijuana, addictive substances. Yay, new markets. These are addiction merchants. And so they'll just pick any market that is, it's got a product where they can hype up the addictive properties of the product.
And I find it fascinating at the moment, like the whole discussion's moving on to sustainability and everything, and regenerative agriculture, and even the big food companies are trying to take over that marketing message and own it and say that, their, grain-based foods are more environmentally friendly. And it's just like, wow, they just keep on moving to take over the messaging through whatever advertising investment that they can to take over that message, to make the community think what they want, and move it up from a grassroots level that's really powerful to get people to believe passionately that these foods are better for themselves, the environment, and et cetera, the planet. When, really just the whole model of taking, chemical fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, jamming them into the ground and making cheap, addictive food-like products for us that we can't stop eating is, not just bad for us, but it's bad for the planet, and it's not sustainable for the long term, because in the next, however many years, we're going to run out of methane to make synthetic fertilizers. So it's not sustainable at all. So anyway.
And the discussion is all about meat, but I dug into the USDA statistics. I looked at 1970 and 1997 to compare, way before obesity, way after obesity. And it's not meat. There was no increase, very, very small increase.
The red meat consumption's gone down as a percentage of calories, really.
It was wheat, gluten-containing wheat, corn, high fructose corn syrup, sugars, dairy, and French fries.
Yeah, and refined seed oils, which just seems to be added to everything, which is dominating our diet. All like extra calories are coming from refined seed oil.
But the point is that everybody's like, oh, it's meat production that's ruining the planet. Americans eat a pound per person per day of sugars, gluten-containing flours, high-fat dairy, and French fries.
Yeah.
A pound per person per day. Nobody is talking about that. Like if people stopped eating all of those extra calories, you can just imagine the millions of acres that are now being devoted to corn and wheat and sugar and dairy and potatoes, that they would go back to being wild and natural and have tree color. And nobody is talking about that.
And have nutrition in the food that we're eating. It's amazing. Like we're eating, we're producing in America about 1,000 more calories per person than we were about 50 years ago. And if we could reverse our addiction to processed food, our overall intake, our consumption would plummet. And how good would that be for the environment? And sustainability. It's unreal.
Yeah. I mean, when you fly over the middle of the United States, it's just like wall-to-wall corn and wheat. Yeah. And a lot of other countries now too, China and so on. Yeah, it's incredibly deceptive.
Yeah.
The processed food industry spends about $10 billion a year on media, and they just control the story. That's why I'm so grateful to you, Marty. You're rocking this. You're getting the word out there. This is what's really going on. The emperor has no clothes, and thank you.
Kindred spirits. Another question from a business point of view: what impact do you see financially processed food addiction having on our health, our economy, from a financial point of view? I just see the cost of this metabolic disease is just spiraling out of control.
Well, it is. It's very interesting. I don't know how this is going to come down. So with tobacco, we saw it really started in restaurants and transportation centers. So restaurants started having no smoking zones, and airplanes started having no smoking zones, and it went from there. I keep wondering, where is it going to start with processed foods? Interestingly enough, the only places that are doing things like clearing out the sugary drinks, the juices and sodas, one is the University of California, San Francisco campus.
Wow.
And then some hospitals.
Even they get pushed back. I know Gary Fettke was pushing the buttons in Tasmania and got a lot of pushback from people.
Yeah. It's an aspect of this particular addiction that's so what happened to Gary Fettke is it got into the crosshairs of a religious group that manufactures a lot of processed foods because they have a religious belief that Jesus is not coming back until people stop eating animals. So I got to meet Belinda Fettke. God, I just adored her. Yeah, and I met her one day at a conference, and the next morning I woke up and I thought, wow, because meat is not addictive. It doesn't light up those craving centers. That's another way that we know what's addictive and what's not. This lights up the craving centers and this doesn't. So meat doesn't light them up. And I ran to find her the next morning. I said, Belinda, I wonder if this religious order is deliberately promoting processed food addiction because people tend to eat more plants and less meat when they're in the addiction. She says, oh, I bet you're right. No. This is, when you, oh boy, yeah. It's complicated.
What she's dug up about the whole background of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is completely fascinating and very powerful. And yeah, it's really like the ethical belief system about, animals are equal or better than people. And then, like I said, the religious view and then the commercial interests coming together, all those three things together converge. Are very powerful.
But I will tell you, just a ray of hope here, I hope, is I am finally at the point where I'm willing to write professional trainings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I am deep into, I hired consultants to help me figure out how to do this, and I'm deep into my first course.
Great.
And my first course is going to be about, well, the first lesson in the first course was about the tobacco industry. The second lesson is going to be, how did this spread so quickly?
Yeah.
A mere 10 years. And you see a 50% increase in obesity rates. How did it happen so quickly? And so that's going to be the second lesson. And then I'm going to have, I don't know, I've got 6 lessons incorporated into this course, very rich because there's so much material. And then a lot of very practical things for practitioners, very short videos that they can show to their clients. So I am now in a phase of, what I'm doing in the world where I'm really focused on giving practitioners the education and tools, handouts that they can just hand over to their clients. I mean, because Marty, I just started thinking about this like 2 weeks ago. I know the tobacco story. Even I'm learning new things thanks to the team at UCSF. I just didn't know about the Hawaiian Punch in 1963. So, and I learned a lot from Nina Teicholz this year about, the role of the food pyramid. That's just like, that was another huge force for getting this addiction out there so fast. And you see the tobacco industry really, the processed food industry now, you can see that they're starting to think about entering it in a bigger way. But they know from tobacco how to get ahead of the game. So they're going to corrupt all the regulators first.
Yeah.
And they went in there and got that food pyramid, the entire different bottom row is addictive foods. Okay. So I didn't really think about this hard until about 2 weeks ago when I was writing this tobacco lesson. And here's the deal. And maybe some of your viewers could write, if they have a few minutes to type in, they could give me their thoughts on this, which is, suppose you've lost your parents to cancer, or you've lost your feet to diabetes, or you've lost a child's education because of attention deficit, or because of bad behavior, or you have you have somebody in prison because they committed a violent crime. Okay, so because processed foods can do all those things. And here comes somebody like me. I come along and I say, well, here's what really happened. We had these tobacco addiction merchants come in and deliberately caused these things to happen to you and your loved ones.
For profit.
I mean, it's like shocking. It's like, what? Are you sure? And then you just go through the evidence. So this lesson, I'm writing out this lesson for the practitioners, and I'm thinking, you know what? I got to help these practitioners help people get over, finding out your daughter she didn't die of natural causes. She was deliberately made sick for the profit of these addiction merchants. So even an issue like that, how do you sit across from a patient, maybe somebody that you've struggled with decades, somebody you have a really good relationship with, they've trusted you, you're the doctor, and now along comes this new technology. You're like, oh, I got a cure. Yes, we're going to get you into a group. It's an online group. Your mirror neurons are going to turn around and you got a chance and we're going to reverse all these diseases. And they're like, what? Well, but you got to tell the story. To give any of that credibility, you've got to be able to say what the heck happened.
How do we get that?
These addiction merchants, took the tobacco addiction model and applied it to processed foods. And so what happens to a person who's really, really suffered for a very long time and been blamed, right? Because the professionals said, well, if you just tried harder, no, the program you're giving me is not working. So how do you get somebody through that? I don't know, but if your viewers want to write in any suggestions, or what are they thinking right now? Maybe some of your viewers are getting this information for the first time. It's like,
Mm.
Somebody did this to me on purpose. I have an eating disorder. You know, my sister died of anorexia, but somebody did this to me on purpose. Like people say, oh, I don't think it was deliberate. Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I see the same thing as you in the power of groups and small communities that, we saw with type 1 group, this amazing type 1 diabetes group. They're all living and thriving with type 1 diabetes. And my wife had that neuron moment. And when I can be like that, I can follow that, I can take this seriously and modify my diet, and our life has changed, and it motivates us to, to do these things and live radically different compared to the mainstream world out there. And I suppose just as more groups like this come together, and your group and Low Carb Down Under and all the different online communities, they're really powerful to continue to roll out that message and get the information out there. And social media is powerful, and it's difficult, and there's other powers out there, like you say, that have massive advertising budgets to counter that message. But we can do a lot to help people, give them food that doesn't overdrive that serotonin dopamine pathway, that they don't become addicted to food, and they become in control of their food and enjoy their food, and like you say, enjoy the rest of their life. It's exciting to be a part of that, but it's a big,
it is. We have 4 hours a day of live programming, and we actually, our gap is in Australia during the day, so we're looking for ways to add one more, so that 24 hours a day, every 4 to 6 hours, there'll be a live event, and that we can just persuade those mirror neurons that this is your tribe, follow this tribe. It is, I can't describe it. You get somebody in their 60s, like I'm 68, you get somebody in their 60s, and finally, for the first time in their lives, they have control of their food. And finally, they understand that all the BS, all the horrible things that they were told, and all the surgeries and pharmaceuticals that they were given, none of it could possibly have ever worked. You got to do that slowly. A lot of time and space to absorb that. But then they do, the human body just comes straight back. The brain comes back, the heart comes back. And it's amazing that hardwiring, that factory setting is there.
Yeah, once you give it the food and nourishment it needs, the body just rejuvenates and becomes healthy again.
Yeah.
So what happens in your group? How do you help people in those chats online every hour, or 4 or 5 hours a day? What happens there, and how do you help people work that through? Is it a discussion thing, or they ask questions like we're doing now, or how does that work?
Everything. So everything we do, we start with a check-in, and it's not chit-chat. It is because one of the ways that the processed food industry is able to get us to keep eating these highly toxic substances is because of it is the role of media. When we watch a lot of media, we're focused on what's going on in the program, and we totally lose touch with what's going on with us. So a simple question like, would you check in with us? That makes the person actually like, oh, how am I feeling? Somebody's going to ask me, and then they start to take notice, and then they notice that they really thrive. They feel best on simple, easy to prepare foods, a lot of sleep and rest and meditation and time spent with other really cool people. That those are the things that actually make them feel good. And it's not what's going on in the media. And you can't buy that. And yes, you can, but the things that media is selling in those commercials are not those things. And those things are virtually free.
Yeah.
And they're virtual. We're just about to increase our prices to $14 a week.
Right.
Come on, yeah. So, and if people don't have $14, we're really just on the cusp of getting people to train to be virtual assistants or typists or things like that. Because this, like any addiction, processed food addiction is devastating financially. Yeah. So we do a check-in and then we do affirmations. You can literally change the way the neurons in your brain fire by speaking. I have great control over my food. And then you come to a cue, a triggering situation, and that affirmation is sitting right there. No, I have great control over my food. Highly protective affirmations. You are literally training neurons in how to fire. And then we do little exercises. I'm not a therapist. I'm a great peer support person, but I've never trained in therapy. I'm obviously a researcher and educator. But little exercises like, because of blank, I used to blank, but now because of blank, I blank. So because of processed food addiction, I used to binge all the time, but now I have control of my food and I am so happy. So what are you doing when you do an exercise like that, especially if you write it down and you read it over and over and over again? You're creating a pathway. You're actually influencing the way neurons fire, and you're getting confidence. Oh, but now I'm happy. Yeah. So instead of a pathway that goes from the site of processed foods to, let's eat that, you have a pathway that goes from the site of processed foods to, I used to eat those and they made me so depressed, and now I don't eat them and I'm so happy. Yeah. So you can just like a highway company comes through and carves a new road, you can carve new neural pathways. It's called neurosculpting. Yep. And the book is Rick Hanson's Hardwiring Happiness. Yep. Yeah. So and it's fun. It's really fun. It's just fun. Having fun is the best, answer to addiction. We have a lot of fun in these chats. Very simple, very simple. Yeah.
Build new habits. And I think maybe the last question was the most popular from our survey is, does a recovering food addict need to exclude all bad foods? And is there a role for moderation, or moderation is a stupid idea for somebody who's a recovering food?
So that's just an incredibly good question. So what did I get out of the textbook? Here's the textbook. What did I get out of it? 3 years, day in, day out, often 7 days a week. What was the most important thing I got out of this? One is, this is a really severe addiction. And that's why nothing works. If you have a really severe addiction, that means those neural pathways are just pumping out craving messages all the time, like violently. And in order to make that stop, you have to have enough recovery messaging to literally crowd out. And that means you've got to have a lot of recovery messaging. That's why we have 4 hours a day, and we have a Facebook group, and we have PM, and we record our conference calls, and people can just load up. You can do this. So the idea is that if you have a severe addiction, you go to residential treatment, 28 days, and then you come out and you relapse. So that doesn't work. It doesn't work for drug addiction, and it definitely doesn't work for processed food addiction, because home is where the binging, is where the chronic overeating took place. And so place triggers are very, very powerful. So you just come home and you start again. You get triggered. This part of the brain gets activated again, and it starts controlling your behavior again. So the next level of treatment is called intensive outpatient. And that's where you would go to a hospital every day for months and months. And you would go from 9 to 4, and you would just get therapy and group sessions and et cetera. So I looked at that and I said, you know what, we could do that online. Because, people are also immobile. Maybe they have an extra 100 pounds or 200 pounds of fat tissue on their bodies, or processed foods attack joints. Maybe they can't walk anymore, or they just don't want to go out. They become very isolated. It's something that we've learned in our addiction reset community, is that people might not be ready to engage in a group So this is very hard to treat,
Mm.
and we're learning every day. So we just, for example, in the last month, we said, let's work with people in private messenger on Facebook one-on-one and see if we can just gradually and gently get them to go over and start making comments in the Facebook group, or maybe listen to recordings, not live, but recordings of the conference calls. We don't record the video chats because it's too confidential, but we do record our voice-only conference calls. So how do you gently bring somebody out of isolation? Nobody's looking at this. People have been so traumatized by body shape. That's another thing about this addiction that you don't have in other addictions, is you just have all these massive shaming, blaming, ostracizing, traumatizing issues around body shape. So, I mean, it's just what has happened to people is so devastating. It's so awful. So, yeah, it's tricky. It's very tricky to support somebody and care about somebody and get that trust going. I really do care about you. I don't care about your body shape. Yeah, okay, well, we'll get to that. I know it's important to you, but I just care about you. It works.
You've
It
been
does
there, so
work.
you've trod that journey, so you can take them on that journey and they can see you care.
Well, here's the thing. So there's, in this book, in the textbook, the whole middle section is about diagnosing. There are 11 diagnostic criteria. There are that the American Psychiatric Association has put together over 50 years of intense debate, and now it lines up with the international diagnostic criteria. There are 11 specific behaviors that people, when they get into an addiction, it gets worse and worse and worse, and they start exhibiting more and more of the behaviors. Well, 6 out of these 11 behaviors is considered a severe addiction.
Yeah.
And I wrote one full chapter, a fully documented chapter, that this addictive behavior exists in chronic overeating. There are 11 full chapters on this. And I wrote the first chapter and I said, oh yeah, every food addict has unintended use. That's what it is. You make a plan to use it one way and then you eat way more. Okay, everybody's got that. Chapter 2. Failure to cut back. Oh yeah, everybody's got that. Everybody's tried to diet and the weight just comes back.
Yeah.
Number 3, cravings. Oh yeah, everybody's got that. Yeah, I'm craving this, I'm craving that. Number 4, time spent. Yeah, I stop at all these fast food places and all I do is eat and watch TV and it takes up all my time. Okay, everybody's got it. Most people have that. Number 5, failure to fulfill roles. Like, I can't get down on the floor with my kids. I'm not applying for a promotion. I have too much brain fog. I'm too tired and I'm too fat. Okay, well, a lot of people meet number 5. Number 6, relationship problems. Oh, yeah, my husband is complaining all the time, blah, 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 about the way I eat and the bills and stuff. Well, that's when the epiphany happened.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, wow, I've written these 6 chapters. Every food addict I've ever met meets all 6 of these criteria. That means everybody's got a really severe addiction. And then I wrote the next 5 chapters and everybody had all of those too. So that is out of all the things. I mean, I do love that the book says, no nonsense. This is a real syndrome. 2,000 friggin' citations, get a grip. I love that. I love that piece. Really important. But the most important thing to come out of it is just the realization this is a really severe addiction. And that means you need hours and hours and hours of recovery programming, neuron programming to counteract, the fact that we live in these cultures with blanket processed food stimulation all the time. Okay.
Wow. It's been amazing. Thank you so much. So for people to follow you, if they want to buy your textbook, it's on Amazon. I think someone just posted a link for a little bit of light reading, or there's a lot of really good podcasts out there. Is there any other way? There's a few Facebook groups as well they can check out.
I would definitely recommend joining our free, of course it's free, Facebook group, Food Addiction Education.
Yep.
If you are ready, if you're just like, I can't believe there's a group, somebody's going to understand this, then go to foodaddictionreset.com.
Yep.
And go ahead and sign up for the Addiction Reset community. We're all over the world. We're from the UK and across North America and all the way to New Zealand and Australia. And then if you just need some handouts, like you need to know the food plan, some of the basics, we have a whole website of free handouts called foodaddictionresources.com.
Yeah. Haven't checked those out yet. You sent me some of the food lists that look really good. So yeah, really important to go, well, these are the foods that work for me and suit my goals and turn off those addiction pathways. So thank you very, very much for nearly an hour and a half of your time. It's been a whole lot of fun, and I was really looking forward to talking to you, and I think you really add some amazing things in. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks,
Have a great day. And everybody has loved all the comments. So yeah, looking forward to working together with you in the future. Thank you, Joan.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.